Jag måste säga att ni är väldigt duktiga på att hålla tiden. Det gläder mig. So we are now moving over to English yet again for this session with two international speakers. And we're very proud to present Jane Audas, freelance, digital producer and curator, worked with many museums. In the break we talked about the Wellcome, we talked about Imperial War Museum and so forth. Welcome. No, wait. Turn it on.
I have to touch the technology.
Well, it has to be turned on. I mean.
That's me told.
Oh, brilliant. Now, here we go.
Yes, so I've come from London to talk to you in English, which is really gracious of me, isn't it? I don't speak any Swedish, to my shame. No, that's not true. I know the words ABBA, IKEA or IKEA, Nokia. That's it. Is Nokia Swedish? It is, I think. I hope it is. Is it Swedish? Oh, shame. I'll get my coat. But yeah, I'm really impressed that you can all listen to me in English, and I'll try and go quite slowly in a patronizing way. But somebody wave and tell me if I just don't make sense at all. So I worked on a project called Digital Stories in 2014 at the Wellcome Collection in London. I've divided my talk into chapters because it's about stories. So there are 3 brief-ish chapters, and chapter 1 is about the inspiration behind digital stories, so how we got to the build stage. This was a stage of the project that I wasn't involved in, but there are an awful lot of documents and weary people out there who've talked to me about this part of the project. I wanted to talk to you about something that I would find useful to listen to if I was thinking about doing something around long-form media in museums or libraries. So digital stories is what we called a piece of long-form media. So I'll talk about what inspired it and what happened before we kicked off the project build. Is somebody doing something with that light, or is it me? Anyway. So this is the Wellcome Collection on Euston Road. I don't know if anybody has visited this. It's very near to King's Cross and St Pancras stations. So it has a really good cafe, really clean toilets, and a great shop. Also does really amazing adult exhibitions. And when I say adult, I mean they have an opinion. They're really quite intelligent exhibitions and I think thought-provoking. And I don't work there, I'm a freelancer, so hopefully you can trust me when I say that. So the Wellcome Trust, which pays for this building, the exhibition programme, and all the other Wellcome initiatives, is a charitable foundation. It funds research into animal and human health. The trust was set up by Sir Henry Wellcome in the 19th century. Henry Wellcome was a pharmacist, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and a collector, a really big collector. In 1932, he designed this building to house his museum and library of medicine-related material. So you can see that he probably had quite a lot of stuff. This is Sir Henry Wellcome himself. Amazing moustache. And we can only assume that this is him in his daytime dress and this is him at a party. I think there are rumours going around about Henry Wellcome, but we'll stick with party. So he was what we'd call a voracious collector. He's the sort of collector who thought, I'm not buying 15 microscopes when I can buy 1,500 microscopes. And the collection reflects that. He travelled the world buying well, anything that wasn't nailed down. So objects, books, and he also employed a team of agents to buy things for him. And so before the collection was rationalised after he died, so they had to wait till he was out of the way, it was housed in huge warehouses, obviously unaccessioned, mostly unlabelled, and as I say, just lots of things that no one really knew why they'd been bought. So they were jammed with crates with a jumble of ethnographic and fetish items. He was big on fetish items, which takes you back to my hint about Henry Wellcome. There were lots of weapons, there were lots of masks, tools, paintings, pestles, whole shop fronts, and the shops behind the shop fronts, walking sticks and so on. On his death in 1936, his collection totaled 1.5 million books and objects, and at the time that was around 5 times the size of the Louvre collection. So that gives you a kind of an idea of how mad he was. So this is the reading room, which is a new public space in that Wellcome building, and it opened in February 2015. Digital Stories is initially going to be a tablet-based tour for this space. Well, so I say tablet, but delivered from mobile devices, basically. It was going to be developed in parallel with the physical space, and it was intended to fill a perceived gap in the reading room, so somewhere to put deeper interpretation. So in a design-led space, which this was, they have to put interpretation somewhere, so they were going to put it in the digital realm. They then commissioned a really interesting agency I've worked with, who are called Frankly, Green and Webb, to do some research on who might use this reading room digital tour. And they predicted if Wellcome did a tablet tour, they would hit only 2 to 5% of their audiences. So, and that was based on the fact that most visitors don't use mobile devices to look up collections information whilst in physical spaces. And I think that's fair to say of museums and libraries and all sorts of different spaces. And it was true in 2013, and I think it's still true now. So the decision was made to divorce digital stories from the physical reading room space, and it became a digital-only project designed for web and tablets only. The reading room interpretation itself eventually became a book, which was called the Reading Room Companion. So you just have to forgive some of my images. So the Wellcome has digitised over 1 million of its images, and they're out there free to use, and so I've used quite a lot of them. Any excuse for an image is my motto. And yeah, they're really hard to find, so if anybody wants references afterwards, let me know. You can't just do searches, but that's a whole other talk. So Digital Stories had a product development phase in 2013 of several months. This was the phase where I wasn't involved. An agency called Clear Left came to the project during this development phase. They were already in the Wellcome building, building the library website at the time. So we kind of moved across in that way that quite often people say, you know, do you know anyone who can make this? And someone goes, yes, I do. And so they moved over. And I think maybe later in the talk, you kind of get a sense of why that wasn't the best idea, maybe. So the development stage was a period of meetings, external consultations, user groups, lots and lots of documents on the server, and lots of research with consultants. So the intention was to find out what digital stories could be now it had been separated from the physical space. And I think, in my experience, that happens quite a lot. So if the digital project isn't joined to an exhibition or some kind of project of its own in the physical world, I think people find it hard to kind of articulate what it might be. So there was lots of going around in circles on the development phase. Management didn't know what it wanted, except it wanted something big and something impressive. And to me, it's really significant that this development phase wasn't about content. And I'd come back to that in a bit as well. The main inspiration behind Digital Stories was, as I said, interactive long-form journalism, as it was called. In 2013, this was a fairly new trend. These sites usually use parallax scrolling to, in theory, offer a fluid and more immersive user experience. So this was one of the earliest and shiniest examples. It was New York Times snowfall site. Sorry, this was 2012. It was predicted to be the future of journalism and caused quite a fuss amongst technical and web people in museums and heritage. So could this be the new form for them too in digital departments? Hot on the heels of Snowfall was The Guardian and their Emmy award-winning NSA Files Decoded. So really big beast, full of data visualization, videos, and lots of bells and whistles. And interestingly, this is one of the few examples of kind of parallax scrolly sites, as we ended up calling them, that has been added to. There's not a lot of examples since we kind of made this of this kind of format going forward. BBC made their version, which launched in early 2014, called I Wonder. So they spent a year refining their CMS to get it to the stage where it could be an interactive, parallax, scrolly, rolling, immersive experience, which is a long time. And then they spent 3 months making 7 of the first 7 guides. So all these productions, Snowfall, NSA Files, and I Wonder, were intense productions. They took a long time, large teams of people, and lots of money. So Wellcome's wish for deeper content reflecting trends in journalism and the ubiquity of mobile devices led them to decide digital stories should be a parallax immersive experience. It would be designed to lead users deeper into the digitised material in the Wellcome Library, as at this time, well, they still are doing it, they've got a massive digitisation project going on. So the idea was that we would top this and give people kind of doorway into that, which of course was something the stakeholders were really happy with. So this is chapter 2, how we developed our content and finally started to build something, which is when I get excited. And as I mentioned before, the development period for digital stories didn't include content development. So we began the build project with a suggested form, but nothing to put on the shelves, as it were. So in January 2014, this isn't us, this is a picture from 1954. If only we looked this glamorous. In January 2014, we started to pull the digital stories team together. So our team at the Wellcome was as follows. There was a producer, me, a project owner, 2 researchers, 2 authors, 1 project manager who was also working on the reading room project. And most of us worked part-time for the best part of a year on digital stories, which gives you an idea of the resource behind it. Obviously, there were more people involved from Wellcome, so there were conservation, digitization, curatorial, and anyone else we could kind of rope in and find information from. So the initial idea for digital stories was that Clearleft, the agency that had been moved across, would relocate from Brighton, which is an hour from London, into the Wellcome space for 3 days a week. The idea was that this would lead to visible product development and buy-in from Wellcome stakeholders, which kind of also flags up that people weren't really comfortable with what digital stories was, and they felt they needed to kind of show what was happening, a kind of justification of the money, perhaps. But the practicalities, logistics, common sense, and project cost had been left rather vague. And in the end, 2 different ways of working meant it wasn't a good fit. Also, digital stories was a project outside the Wellcome Web team, which I'll go back to later, but never a good idea. Following some brainstorming and ideation days in early 2014, the agency Clearleft wireframed some initial design ideas. But this initial sprint was then halted indefinitely whilst we worked on the content, which would have been okay if we knew how long that was going to take. It's a really expensive way to develop a digital project, to keep a digital agency sitting around on their heels whilst you mess about sorting out your content. And in this case, it was made worse because the agency was sitting in the building looking at us going, where's our content? So early on, we'd identified, that's not very nice. Early on, we'd identified the need for the storyteller role in this project, which would usually be a curator in a museum or a library, I guess. What's the word in the library? Anyway. But here, we wanted them to be writers. So the most significant people to find were our authors, as they eventually really became the glue for the project. So the author for the Mindcraft story was a chap called Mike J. He came to Project X, as it was known for a long time, with an idea based upon work he had done for a book called The Heirloom Gang, which is set in the 18th century and is about a guy called James Tilly Matthews, who was in a mental health institution called Bedlam, and thought that there was a mind control machine controlling the entire world called the Heirloom. The author for the collector's digital story, Anna Farty, was working on the reading room guide, which I mentioned earlier, so the extended labels for the reading room catalogue. Anna's subject of collectors was chosen by committee in the Wellcome, so obviously enough they had an interest in collections and collectors, and I think for me the Mindcraft is the more interesting development, but you can kind of make up your own minds about that, obviously. So each digital story, I'll read this out just in case you can't see it at the back. Each digital story had 6 chapters, 6 find out more library layers with digitized books and ephemera, 1 animation, if only we could have made more, several to-camera films with curators and the authors talking to people, several image galleries, and a quiz or an interactive. So obviously each story was a sum of parts. We needed to co-develop our assets so that we could deliver content to the agency clear left, so they could get design sign-off, and then they could build something. The chapter count, so 6 chapters, was author-led. The library layer was asset and digitization-led, and the animations, interactions, and films were time and budget-led. As we went on, we ran out of time to make more assets. Obviously, we could have carried on. It's great material. And we'd started with long lists of possible content, and we'd edited them down, working with the authors to draft a story. And then we'd send our researchers, and how lucky we were to have researchers. We sent them off to the stacks, as it were, to look for related material in the collections and in the Wellcome images. They also chased up curators for us to get further suggestions. So we tried to make each piece of content kind of earn its place in the story, to make sure it added something. The animations, for instance, were developed because we had stories to tell, integral parts of the stories to tell, but no images to tell them with. So chapter 3, what we learned and what audiences have told us about digital stories. So you may have gathered that digital stories was a little bit of a difficult project. The agency relationship was problematic, and eventually it became untenable. The evaluation, so after they went live, Wellcome commissioned quite some different bits of evaluation, looking at how clean the code was, doing user testing, and I think I'm not sure that they're public, but they're really brave pieces of work. Unfortunately, they also pointed out lots of things the team had brought up whilst the project was going on, so it was quite bittersweet for us to read the evaluation. There were things we could have changed. So Digital Stories was supposed to be an agile project, but you can't run an agile project in a non-agile institution. Also, agile methodologies for software development are not the same as agile methodologies that allow content and functionality to be developed in parallel. Having the agency working inside Wellcome meant we had also 2 Scrum Masters, so things got quite heated at times. It wasn't clear who was in charge, and the project team sat between the agency clear left and the Wellcome Trust. So we kind of, because we weren't within the web team and sort of amongst friends, it was quite a difficult place for us to be. It left us quite vulnerable, and I certainly wouldn't recommend running big digital projects outside of a web team. The idea originally had been to make 3 to 4 digital stories, but we made 2, and it took a lot longer than we'd thought. The idea had always been that digital stories code would be reusable and open source, and then we'd upload it to GitHub. We did upload it to GitHub. Nobody's used it. It's not clean code. It wasn't what we'd hoped it would be, and some of that fault lies with the agency, and some of that fault lies with us for just being caught up in the moment and not chasing the quality of the product. The build was much more bespoke than we'd initially planned, so there are platforms out there we could have used, and at the end, if I don't forget, I've got a list of a few that might be interesting for anyone thinking of doing this. Also, the agency had assumed, because of the development period when they were intensively involved, that they would be involved also in the development of the content. but that led to misunderstandings and eventually a split between build and the content team. The UX of Project X was problematic in places. On the whole, the user experience was quite confusing. The main narrative scroll was fine, but users didn't like and didn't want to go off to the side, as it were, to look at other things, and they didn't know how to get back when they did. Videos failed often because on limited bandwidths, and really minor technical difficulties led users to abandon their sessions. And I think, again, that's quite common, and most digital projects I've worked on don't have iteration periods, they don't have budget to put things right, and so it's kind of, this sounds really critical, but it's also, I think, a really common thing in digital projects from where I sit. We also hid our assets too well. That's an image gallery, you know, that one click and you get to lots of really interesting content. But the problem is that users are scrolling really fast on their, probably on their tablets, and they just really miss all these kind of pointers. They easily lost track of where they were within each chapter. They had trouble finding their way out, and as I said before, were unsure what to do next. So the evaluation really taught us that immersive experiences still need to provide orientation and cue user actions wherever possible. It's not good enough to be able to use it in the project team. I think the user testing, I'm a real advocate for user testing, and if possible, sitting the designers down so they can watch members of the public use their product. I think it's a real leveler, and we, as I said before, we would have caught lots of these things perhaps if we'd done some of that. A good example is the agency only added the word scroll down under protest, and only at the beginning of each chapter. So after you'd watched a film, you know, we would probably, most people in this room would know what to do. The average user doesn't know what to do, so they get lost and they abandon the product. Evaluation also revealed that this format wasn't ideal for social sharing or reuse of content, which is a real shame because these are all open source images. You can use them for anything you want. They're all high res. You know, it's amazing content, and it just isn't the right kind of interaction for people to stop and share something. So the immersion worked and people get really immersed in our product, but this was at the cost of sharing. I think that's something to bear in mind if you're doing products like this. Also, we made too much content. We over-iced our cake. So I'm trying to be clever. I'm not sure how that translates. Perhaps if I just tell you I'm being clever, then that's enough. This is the library layer, and it fulfilled institutional aims, so it exposed digitised collections, which was part of the project that was going on alongside ours, and it exposed the Wellcome Library to new users. But only 5% of final users clicked on Find Out More. So the agonising digitisation of new assets wasn't wasted, but was almost wasted completely. There are very few people get to this level. They click, obviously, they click the more decorative next chapter. Oh. That said 5 minutes, by the way. So after all that beautiful interactive imagery, users were given this really plain interface with no explanation of why they were there or why these assets were important to the bigger story. So we really did learn that access to entire digitized books didn't provide meaning for the non-specialist general browsing audience that we were hoping for. So this is one of the most interesting images we had in digital stories. It was available to the user in that book there, but in the main scrolling spaces, we basically panned a camera over this so the tumour gradually appeared. A really cheap thing to do in terms of development, but a really effective way to deliver content. And we've got amazing content in museums that people want to discover. They want to hear the stories and they want to see your objects. So the motto of that story is make your content easy to find and easy to understand. On almost every digital project I've worked on, content is the thing that takes the most time and most money. And we made them, on digital stories, we made the common mistake of prioritizing form over content. The content was thought about too late in the process and not given enough time to develop. It takes time to develop content, and this is one of the things that's the same whether you're making an exhibition or a digital story. Only 3 more slides. So in the end, we had to devise an exit strategy for the agency Clear Left, and we brought in a solo coder to the Wellcome building to work in the web team, hurrah, and finish the stories. Wellcome had a small marketing budget for this project, a really small one. And after content, this is one of the main things that I kind of get on my high horse about, marketing digital projects. It's sometimes you get one tweet, very rarely you get a campaign. And in my opinion, there's a gap in digital knowledge in many museum marketing departments. And it's kind of, we made this, please now tell people we've done it. So Mindcraft was launched in December 2014, collectors in February 2015. It's been visited by 35,000 plus people in just over a year. 60% of users come from outside the UK, which is a lot more than in the Wellcome Collection building or to their website. People spent double the time on digital stories in the main website, but still only 4% of users visited the entire story. User satisfaction was high. The immersive format allowed us to explore narrative more fully, and this approach is well suited to an exploration and understanding of science and medicine in a cultural context, and that's something I copied and pasted from the Wellcome website. Basically, it worked, and we engaged people in the same way that they managed to engage people in the physical space at Wellcome. And that's blatant advertising. That's it.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you for sharing all those challenges. That's what we need to know, isn't it? So I'm sure there's a lot of questions.
Nope.
No questions. Well, I have questions. So what would be the main sort of questions you would ask? I mean, because you talked about the challenges. So when you go for work with institutions, what new main questions would you ask before joining a project? I mean,
the thing I learned from this project was to not go into projects where I can't shortlist and choose the agency, and kind of fit their talents to the project as far as we know it's going to be at that point. It was really difficult for me spotting that they weren't the right people from the beginning and not being able to do anything about it. I sound quite bitter, don't I? I still love what I do.
So what would be, I mean, sort of your main advice for institutions doing projects like this?
Do your content first. Get an idea of what content it is you want to do and what you hope to do with it. There is no point paying really expensive digital agencies £700 to £1,000 a day to sit around and watch you think about your content. And if the content's not good, it doesn't matter how good the form is, and I think we've probably proved that here.
Yeah, I sort of also overheard some kind of thinking of simplify what you like to do so that you bring your audience with you, that it's not about doing the most clever...
It's not all the bells and whistles. Yeah.
Exactly.
I do think museum content and library content is amazing enough, and we shouldn't apologise for it, and we don't need to make it something that it isn't. I think we need to expose it and let people enjoy it and not be embarrassed about it. Not that you are, but...
Yeah.
Well reminded. Absolutely.
So the question was, just could we repeat the question, was around what infrastructure you were using? Is that?
I know what you mean.
Yeah, but just repeat it for the camera.
Yeah, so it was what I referred to earlier as we built this in HTML5 and CSS3, and a lot of copy and pasting and some ugly code in there. But we could have done it probably with something that was already out there, which is another good pointer. And some of the platforms you may or may not have heard of. There's a platform called Creativist, which is now called Atavist, which is got some good examples of museums using that and libraries. Obviously, a custom WordPress framework would be probably a quite cheap way to do this. And then you can benefit from all the plugins that have already been designed and not reinvent the wheel. There's Amica, which I know Johan was saying he's using, and there's a Google Art project, which I think is problematic from a user's point of view and really text heavy, but it's out there and you can use it. And then there's one called Neatline, which is good for timelines and maps and things like that.
Would you like to tweet out some of those later on?
I can't get on the Wi-Fi, but...
Oh, God, we
which is classic for a digital conference.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, one more question. Did you have a question? Yeah, yes.
I just wanted to say, like, many of the institutions I work with, I mean, they're very, very good at, they want their content, they want to create their content, they want to get it out there, but they keep forgetting the end user. So is that your experience as well? I mean, they don't evaluate, they don't actually talk to the users. I mean, your example that they should sit down and, actually the developers should actually watch the users.
Yeah, I'd write that into contracts if I could, and very often pick, whilst interviewing agencies during tender, we'll ask them what they feel about that experience and are they happy to be involved in that process, because otherwise it's just developing in a black hole, and what's the point?
So know your user, test it with users. Yeah, audience is important.
Even just a small group of 4 people in the office who aren't part of the project will give you so many answers as to what you can improve.
Yeah. Thank you so much.